May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another episode of Cuke Audio Podcasts. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Today I'm going to read three pieces from a work in progress, Tassajara Stories, the early years with Shunryu Suzuki. So that'll start right after pause to meditate. So when you hear the bell, hit pause, if you wish. And then meditate if you wish, or whatever. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause, and we'll hit the bell to end whatever you wish. Suzuki and Us. Starting from the practice of big mind, our practice will be developed in our activity together. With Suzuki, the canvas starts clean, with big mind. But then there are people in the painting. He gathered his whole life's effort to give to his students. He said he had no existence outside of their existence, and that without them, he would have no practice. Richard suggested once to Suzuki that he get a driver's license so that he would not be dependent on others to do his errands and fulfill his obligations outside of the temple. Suzuki, who had never driven a car, replied, "I never want to be alone." Well, he slept alone at Tassajara, but he hadn't even planned on that. During cabin assignments for the first practice period, he wanted to have a roommate like everyone else. His request was denied. Suzuki always enjoyed interacting with whomever he was around. In a coffee shop on the way to Tassajara, he fell into a conversation with a couple of burly truck drivers. At another time, same place, I saw him talking to a shirtless young long-hair. Even with his robes and shaved head, he'd put people at ease right away. On the other hand, he sure seemed to enjoy being alone and quiet, preparing a lecture, feeding used tea leaves to his garden. Whatever the subject with him, there's always another side, back and forth. Together Alone, Big Mind, Everyday Life, Nirvana, Samsara, even Teacher, Student. Sometimes I am master and you are disciple, and sometimes you are master and I am disciple. He was transmitting the practice he had learned from childhood, a way of life and living, of returning to essence, of coming from essence. And there were many eager to take it on with him. He seemed to have every confidence in each of us. He taught that there was nothing substantial in the way of awakening if we got out of our own way. He gave feedback sparingly so that when it came, it had more weight. There was a 10-minute kinhin or walking zazen between the 2 sitting periods in the morning and the 2 in the evening. Deborah had a tendency to keep her head down. For 2 years, he said nothing to her about it, but one evening, he walked up next to her at the beginning of kinhin, put his hand under her chin, and walked with her, holding it there for the 10 minutes. He said, when the students are great, the teacher is great. Words straight from Shakyamuni Buddha. Nils the Dane said Suzuki was like the good king in the European tradition. He wore the crown that shined the light back on his subjects. Brother David Stendelrast, a Benedictine monk who had studied Zen with Rinzai teachers and with Suzuki at Tassajara, said that the striking thing to him was that almost everyone loved Suzuki completely and was transformed in his presence or even his absence and the memory of him, a remarkable person to find even in a religious community. Suzuki stressed the virtue of friendliness, for his disparate group of renegades. Getting along with each other was a much harder task than getting along with him, who had a gift for making others feel uniquely understood and accepted. He reminded us that we were a Buddhist community, a Sangha, and that we should be genuine friends with each other. His example made it easier to imagine. To know someone is to sense someone's flavor. Flavor is not smell, but something you feel from someone, and each one has some particular personality from which many feelings come out, and each one has their own flavor. Then we have good relationships with each other. We are really friendly with each other. To be friendly does not mean to stick to someone or to try not to lose your friend, but to have full appreciation of his or her personality or flavor. In those days, his students weren't worried about the future. They enjoyed a vigorous and challenging present together, and they trusted in where it would lead them. People in general didn't share in a wider vision that Suzuki referred to sparingly in the establishing of Buddhism in the West. Some did. Richard Baker did. But for most of us, it was a time not to plan, but to appreciate the uncommon opportunity to cultivate oneself with others free from dogma and to help establish Buddhism by forgetting everything and finding everything with a new face. Tassajara was an experience in teamwork, a singular opportunity to support and be supported in making such effort together. Suzuki would point to the impermanence of the situation, saying that this opportunity won't last that long, that in his life he'd only had so much time to practice in such a simple, focused way before he was beset with responsibilities and hassles. The practice at Tassajara was unlike anything happening in America. It often didn't seem like being in America, but the purpose of the practice was not to widen the gap, but to bridge, to give us some way to go back out into the world at large with a new strength. Life at Zen Center with Suzuki was an initiation, a rite of passage, something to savor, an experience that most of us would value the rest of our lives. But at the time, it just seemed like normal life, all else forgotten in the unique and harmonious moment at hand in that rugged, beautiful terrain. With all one's problems, difficult and dear others, and with Suzuki and dining katakiri too, and Kobun and Yoshimura. In a Shosan question and answer ceremony held at the end of a practice period, a student asked Suzuki, "May one apply the absolute rather than the intellectual to existence, to his life?" Suzuki's answer was to raise his hands in gassho and say, almost like a prayer, "May all of us forget all about good and bad and acknowledge our position with each other, and may perfect communication take place between us. Your wish comes from emptiness. My wish comes from each being. But may those two understandings come together to help each other to attain Buddha's way. That is my wish." Dining room. The water's on, the water's on, the water's on, the water's on, I sang as I walked through the courtyard toward the dining room, holding high with right hand a heavy load of dishes on a large oval aluminum tray. The water's on, the water's on, the water's on. The water's on, I continued as I opened the door with my left hand, entered the dining room, and gently set the tray down. I continued singing this mantra as I returned to the coffee and tea area up the steps beside our tiny kitchen and turned off the water filling the samovar of the coffee machine. It needed to be added now and then to provide for the constant demand for hot water. There was too much to do to stand and watch the water in the glass tube in the center of the machine rise up to the fill line. I'd learned not to trust my memory from too many occasions where someone would come up and say to me that there's something wrong with the coffee machine. I'd run over and see water shooting out of the top, shut it off, then drain a bunch so it would heat back up quickly. If it was right before a meal and we hadn't made the coffee yet, we'd have to heat water in the kitchen. Even if there was still plenty of time for the gas flames below to heat it back up to 200 degrees, there'd be people standing around waiting for it to be hot enough for individual cups of tea or whatever. So it really needed to be filled a partial amount at a time. Caffeine was the drug of choice at Tassajara. The only other one allowed was nicotine, and even back then, most people there didn't smoke, and those who did were fairly discreet, with occasional exceptions. A considerable amount of coffee was consumed by guests and students, from lots in the morning to a little at night. If Nils drank this coffee, he'd add a teaspoon of a special brand of an instant coffee he liked to it, while making a disparaging remark about American coffee in general. We'd open a bag of Farmer Brothers coffee and pour it into the filter, then add something like 2.5 gallons of hot water, little by little. When the carafe on that side was getting low, we'd make coffee on the other side. The hot water in the samovar surrounded it. This was before we were enlightened about what good coffee is, but it wasn't terrible for that time. People loved the food, but there were more serious comments on the coffee from guests than anything. Too weak, too strong, too bitter, too old, and okay, good, very good, and just right. Couldn't get the highest praise from everyone, but we strived for the highest percentage. Had to keep it as fresh as we could. New batches made for each meal. A major discovery that greatly increased the number of positive comments was to start with fresh, cold water and not the water in the samovar of the machine that was always hot or getting hot. That discovery came from an alert student who noticed the uptick in approval following one of my memory lapses that flooded the samovar with cold water, necessitating quickly heated substitute water from the kitchen. We prided ourselves in our new improved coffee, but due to the lack of continuity in the ebb and flow of people and positions, that practice was forgotten in time, though it would be periodically revived to be forgotten again. One of the last things the dining room crew did, ideally, was to turn the heat down low on the coffee machine. In the morning, the Zendo cleaner, who woke an hour before others, would turn it back up. Sometimes there would be a slip-up resulting in awful dregs that had been hot all night or tepid brew. Regardless of quality, before zazen in the morning, there would be students stopping by the kerosene lamp-lit coffee tea area, draining off the remains of the night before, a few making individual cups, drinking tea, and a very few who'd been influenced possibly by Chinese mentors, just hot water. In a lecture, Suzuki advised us not to drink before zazen. I took that to mean don't drink stimulants before zazen, and I thought that advice was aimed mainly at Philip Wilson, whom I'd see drinking 3 cups of coffee in a row on his way to morning zazen. Maybe that's when I ceased imbibing caffeine before zazen. Sugar was a drug-like condiment of choice for many people there, including the abbot. But for flies, it was the choice main course. We had to be careful not to have exposed sweet anything due to the fly population. The sugar at the dining room was in packets placed in little bowls around the tables. Then we learned we had to keep these packets hidden between meals to guard against invading youngsters, many of whom were driven to gobble down one packet of sugar after another, possibly as a result of being denied any amount of sugar by their protective and well-meaning parents. When it got hot, we'd leave the windows and doors open till mid-morning, then close them to keep in the cool till later in the day. So cool, it invited me to lie down on the floor and take a quick nap after lunch cleanup and the ever-dusty floors swept and mopped. There were screens on the dining room window and door openings. Those pesky little houseflies, though, would regard any moment of open screen door as an invitation to enter. Bob Beck told me about fly herding, and it became a standard pre-meal ritual in fly season, which pretty much coincided with guest season. After the first ring of the railroad bell announcing dinner soon, we'd open the doors facing the courtyard, get a row of students and guests, each issued a clean, fresh towel on the other side of the room. The towels would be held gripped firmly at the top corners, and on command, we would snap them up quick, then down hard so that they made a sharp popping noise, propelling forward waves of air and sound. We'd march forward, working our way around the tables and chairs, and successfully drive most of the varmints out. We'd repeat once or twice, close up, and ring the second railroad bell for guests to enter and flies to stay out. There was no menu and no reserved seats. Up to 80 people would come in and sit wherever they wanted. The eats would already be set out on platters and baskets brought in at the last minute. For dinner, the salad was put out first. That was fun to do. It would be brought over in 2 huge stainless bowls. We'd add the dressing and toss. Ed Brown cautioned on not using too much. If there was a pool of dressing at the bottom, then there was too much. Cradling a bowl in the left arm, 2 of us would walk around quickly, placing handfuls on each salad plate. We had a feeling of satisfaction when we finished with empty serving bowls and no excess dressing on the bottom. Guests would first have to find their red cloth napkins, which were placed inside napkin rings and spread out on a table. The napkin rings were made of bamboo I'd bought at the docks in San Francisco, sliced up at the shop and soaked for a week in linseed oil. Avery mini labels had the last name of the party written on them, followed by a number if there were 2 or more in the party, or letters, or identifying marks depending on the whim of the student who wrote the label. When the party departed for the last time, the labels easily were pulled off and a new blank one attached in wait for a new name. That was my sole contribution to the aesthetics of the dining room. Everything else, plates, silverware, linen, pictures on the wall, flower vases, was chosen by Virginia Baker. My job was to haul it. I hauled a lot of it. Tray after tray loaded with heavy dishes, empty and full. Charlotte Silver and her much younger devoted husband and colleague Charles Brooks were at Tassajara doing a sensitivity training. I joined in on one of the sessions when I had time. The focus was on body awareness. It was relaxing. A lot of lying down and, say, feeling your feet, listening to Charlotte and Charles talk about feeling feet, then participants describing what they felt foot-wise. I'd visit this wise and odd couple in the big stone room. Charlotte was in her late 60s, German, with a charming accent. She was a fixture at Esalen, and her work greatly influenced the human potential movement. She was fun to be with, rather sparkled, and got a kick out of how much I enjoyed the wine they generously offer me. We were standing together in the courtyard talking, and Charlotte said she'd noticed my upper body tilted to the right. Oh, I told her, I had a weird thing going on in the Zendo. When I sat, I'd lean to the right. Suzuki and Kobun had straightened me up, but I'd slip back to the right. So it's not just when I sit. She had been watching me work and suggested I try carrying those heavy trays with my left arm as well. I started using only my left arm, and she was right. Before long, I straightened up. After that, I found that using both arms kept me straight. We didn't get many complaints about the food. People were constantly positive in their comments, and the whole grain bread they raved about and quickly snatched up what little was being sold in the office. Ed Brown had been well trained, and Alan Winter was there with him. It was a version of early California cuisine and a number of creative additions to what had been learned in the Beck's kitchen. The casseroles were especially popular. When guests asked what the secret was, I'd say, the judicious use of leftovers. There would be only 3 of us working in the dining room, and we'd be eager to tie things up after most of the guests had departed. We had to get all the dishes and food back, but the floor wouldn't be swept until the next morning. However, quite often there would be late and hungry arrivals. A couple, 2 couples, a family of 6, and every once in a while there would be more than that. As usual, Ed spent all day creating his labor of love dishes, was exhausted and getting ready to leave the kitchen when I popped in with, "Everyone's gone but you and me. Party of 12 just arrived in 3 cars. They haven't eaten. What do you think?" Ed would have occasional fits over what appeared to be tiny problems or no problem. But if there was a real problem, he'd snap to it. "Let's do it," he said. I never saw him fail to throw himself back into it for hungry people. I got the table set and ran up to the kitchen to help. "How'd you get all that done so quick?" I said, looking at casserole, bread, salad, all ready to go. He helped me bring it over. Afterwards, we got the minimum cleanup done, and as the bells to evening zazen rang outside, we bowed out. We had 60 students busting their asses to take care of 60 guests. Of course, we had a zendo, ceremonies, construction, upper and lower gardens, but still more than half of us were dealing with some aspect of the guest season, and I'd get guests to work too. I'd make an announcement in the dining room toward the end of breakfast that anyone who wanted to help out, anyone who wanted to help cut vegetables for a while, the kitchen could use some help today. I'd have guests proudly tell me at dinner they'd helped to make the salad. On the way out the kitchen door, I turned to Ed. "You were there. How the heck did the Becks do it with a staff of 8? He just shook his head, ready for bed. The water's on, the water's on, the water's on, the water's on, I sang while walking to the dining room with a bundle of red tablecloths clean from the laundry at Monterey. Cut the string, holding it together, and walked around the room, dropping one at a time to be spread out next. The water's on, the water's on, the water's on, the water's on. David, somebody called out from the courtyard, interrupting my song, which I'd really gotten into. What? The coffee machine is exploding. Rope. The first time I saw Nils, he was staggering down the road from the parking lot, having hitched a ride in with some hippies who were headed into the woods to go camping. Lanky, loud, and funny, he'd left an all-night party in Big Sur drunk and then gotten stoned with the hippies and went along for the ride. Said he'd never been stoned before. Took him to the baths for a sobering soak. Baker was there showing some guests around. He came back in a while and joined us. Saw right through Nils' whacked-out condition to the solid core. Found out he had skills we needed and suggested he stay, and even at one point suggested he might want to become a priest. That was not a normal thing for him to say to people who just arrived, or actually to say at all. Paul said Baker had a gift for intuitively sizing people up. It was early fall of 1967. The first practice period was over, and the second part of a divided guest season was winding up. The next practice period was to be in the spring. Until then, there were some ambitious plans and a lot of work to do. A massive septic tank between the road and the Zendo had been dug and plumbed and was being filled in. Cabins were being fixed up, and the foundation for a new kitchen was coming along. Perfect time for a Danish carpenter to walk in. Tassajara fit Nils quite well. Right off, he was working with our master builder, Paul Disco. Nils would do the joinery for the kitchen roof support. They yelled at each other a lot, but agreement and good work came out of it. And Nils slid right into the zazen schedule, sat bolt upright, legs in lotus from the first. Told me he'd done a lot of that in India. He'd been a merchant marine sailor for years. His choice of words bore that out. Much profanity. Had jumped ship in India, gave all his money away, everything, including clothes, threw his passport away, spent 9 months walking from place to place in loincloth, sitting under trees, meditating. That was back in the early 60s when there was a shortage of food in India. But Nils said his main problem was people giving him too much. Another problem was that sometimes the food was too spicy hot. He'd arrived at a village one day, starving and thirsty, and was enthusiastically invited to join in on the festivities of a local wedding. Many little dishes had spread out on tables. He tried one, but it was too hot to eat. Every subsequent attempt, he said, was the same. His mouth was on fire, so he accepted a glass of water, which was also too hot to drink. Somehow, though, he survived. I was in front of the shop, just starting to tie down a load on our 6-ton Dodge truck. Had a 12-foot bed full of scrap metal to sell in Monterey, stacked up over the top of the 2x6 slant sides. Decades of accumulated junk. A bed frame, an old water tank, corrugated roofing, pipes, barbed wire, old tools, car parts. Nils caught sight of the truck and me from down by the big old oak tree at Tassajara Central. He walked up, looked at the rope in my hands. "Goddamn, ma'am, what the beep way is this?" "It's a trucker's hitch. A guest had shown me how to do it back in the spring." "Here," he said, taking the rope from my hands. "I'll show you a better way." He undid what I'd done and looked the rope over. "Oh, look at this." He held up a frayed section. I said I wasn't worried about it. He shook his head, walked into the shop, came back with a hatchet, put the rope down on a tree stump. I protested, but he shushed me and commanded me to watch. He cut the rope in two with a whack. Then he cut the offending end off with another whack, peeled back the strands on both ends, and braided them together 3 times overlapping. I asked if it shouldn't be braided more, and he shook his head no with a scowl and said that it was at maximum strength, as good as the rest of the rope. "Okay," I said. "Help me get this truck tied down so we can get to the baths on time." He berated me for being in a hurry and said we'd get it tied down soon enough, but first he wanted to show how strong his splice was. "You see," he said, "this trucker's hitch, you call it, is a pulley. You can move that truck with it. Anything that doesn't break the rope. It would break the rope before it pulled that truck. It's just ½ inch. That truck must be a few tons now." "No way." "Watch." Can we do that later?" "No, now." I obeyed. We didn't exactly follow Japanese monastic seniority authority protocol. He got in the truck and repositioned it facing out of the shop so that it was sideways to the road, which had a downward grade toward the creek. Took off the emergency brake, left it in neutral, fastened the rope to the frame of the truck under the front bumper, and ran the rope around the smooth, thick trunk of a sycamore tree nearby. "You're going to break the rope." "David Chadwick, you don't know anything," he called out loud enough for E.L. in the shop to turn his head. Nils ran another hitch off of that, and then another one going around a second small tree. With a big tug on the end of the 3-pulley system, he dug his feet in and strained and screamed for me to help, so I pulled too, and the truck then did move forward maybe a foot, and then another, and then another. "You did it. I know you could do more, but that's good." I thought for sure the rope was going to break. "Yeah, me too." After panting for a moment, it was back to securing the load on the truck. He tied it all down with me assisting. He'd yell at me strongly and impatiently, "No, goddammit, over here. David, you don't know how to do anything," and so forth. Seems angry, but there was play in every utterance. When the last hitch was tight, he walked around and checked each again, nodding with a grave look of approval. He said that stuff can shift and settle, so check it to make sure it's all tight at top at Hughes Ridge and then back down at Jamesburg where the paved road starts. If it's loose, just tug the hitches this way to tighten. And when you're ready to untie, just do this. And he pulled on the hitch another way so that it was instantly undone. Then he walked around the truck, giving each hitch a swift tug so that they all hung loose. "Nils, why'd you do that?" "Now you show me," he called out. Well, at least he didn't walk off laughing. So that was three pieces, 3 draft pieces for this work in progress Tassajara Stories. One thing I thought about them reading notes, I don't want to use bad words. You know why? Well, in the first place, I never do that when I write. I never use cuss words. Goddamn's all right. A little tiny bit every now and then. But, and why? Because my grandmother is always watching me when I write. And also because, like when a podcast goes up, they want to know if there's anything like that in it. And if you say yes, the entire series, even all of Cute podcasts could be affected. So, that's a type of PC problem in America. It really doesn't matter. But I pay attention to it. But even when it doesn't matter, I don't like to use naughty words. I do like to write about naughty behavior, though. So, that piece on Suzuki, what's that? Wow, was that something I wrote for Crooked Cucumber and didn't use? Anyway, I cannot remember when or why I wrote it. I guess I just sat down and wrote it. I've written these things over the last 6 years. So, I guess it could be 7 years. I don't think so. I'd say 6 years. Anyway, and there'll be more about the dining room. That's it for today. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives. Oh, hey, but before I say goodbye, I'd like to thank our sponsor. Thank you, dear listeners, for supporting Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives so that we can keep going. And if you wanted to do that and didn't know how, here's how. Just go to the homepage of cuke.com, cuke.com. There's a donate link up top, down at the bottom. Yeah, click on them. You go to the donate page, shows you how to send a check or make a PayPal donation or become a PayPal subscriber for as little as $1 a month. It's really easy to do, and I've been told it's a very satisfying experience. So thank you very much. Appreciate your consideration there. So where was I? I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cachita, and dear lovely Katrinka, who's going to have dinner ready in a minute. And wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.